Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I'm Sam, breathwork and embodiment coach, muse, and self-growth junkie.
And I'm Anthony, your co-host, transformational men's coach, and general question asker.
Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connecting conversations on life as it happens, wisdom that I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the reviews section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. Hello and welcome to another episode of Grow As We Go. I'm Sam.
And I'm Anthony.
And today we're going to talk about the difference between shame and guilt and dive into like sex culture and sex shame culture. And it's just has been a really interesting topic to me for a long time. Some could say I'm fascinated by sex.
Some might say. Experts might agree.
Sexperts. But so with this episode, we're going to talk about shame and how it shows up in your life and different examples of how it's shown up in our lives. Some starting places for you to dive into, like where it came from for you. And then at the end, we'll go over some tangible ways that you can move through it and move it through your body and move out of it.
That's awesome.
And so, I hope you enjoy the episode.
They're gonna.
So, shame. We all experience shame.
Yeah.
And I think we experience shame in a lot of different varieties, right? Like, I think people are really familiar with body shame. Like just feeling uncomfortable in your body or judgmental about certain aspects of your body, things you don't like we're our own worst critic. People experience shame in our actions, the actions that we take, and maybe we feel shameful about something that we did or guilty about something that we did. And I think that's the difference between shame and guilt is where guilt is more about an experience or a situation or something that happened. And shame is yourself as a whole, I'm gross or I'm bad, instead of I really do think it's we feel body shame, not necessarily body guilt.
Yes, because having the body itself isn't a bad thing. It's we put that value statement onto our body based on what we've heard around us, what's okay and what's not okay.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the difference between shame and guilt.
Yeah. That
because the body is not necessarily an experience. I mean, sure, we are having an experience in the body, but your body is you as a whole.
Yep.
And
the vessel.
Yeah. And so the actions, and then sometimes our thoughts, we'll feel guilty about our thoughts, or even I think you can feel guilty and shameful about your thoughts depending on
Yep, that's
if you're
true.
Identifying with your thoughts, where it's oh, I'm bad because I'm having these thoughts.
Yeah.
Or you're oh man, I shouldn't really be having these thoughts. I'm feeling a little guilty about it. I think it's just a level of identifying with whatever the thought is. We can also feel shame around our families and family of origin, or it's shameful of their actions or things that they have done and feeling guilty, family guilt and shame. And again, I think that is correlated, which word you're using is correlated to how identified you are within that family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is that the deeper that not just our family identity as in having the last name, but how deeply we are connected to and see that family as a source of our identity. Yeah, if that family has done something that's not great, that we are feeling that sense of I'm bad because I'm a Lavoti, or I'm bad because I'm Rockefeller, right? Like, we won't get into that, but
Yeah.
but
How dare you say that one?
I know, right? But there you go, exactly, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I have that last name, so therefore I must be blank.
Yeah. And so with shame and like guilt and all that, I think one thing that everybody, like every single person has had shame around is like sex and sexuality. And whether it's still alive within you or something that like you've been working on healing for a long time and so you feel like it's healed, I feel like there are just new layers of that just continually pop up. Like I think even like people who are in the Tantra world still have shame come up because it's such a like, it's ingrained in our culture, it's ingrained in our religion, in our families. Like it's just it's everywhere, and it's like really, it's, I would say it's impossible to get out of this world and grow up in this world without that.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah. And yeah, so like sex is shamed in our cultures, and I find it really fascinating because there's like this paradox of shame. Like, sex is shameful, don't talk about it, it's very private, keep it hush hush, but also like sex sells, you know, we've got like Victoria's Secret and like all these other different things, but it's like but shh, don't talk about it.
Yeah, don't talk about it, just look at this picture, look at what's appealing, let's get you to look at this advertisement that brings in more revenue for my product. But when it comes to actually like healthily talking about not having sex being this objectified or like strange out there thing that's like super taboo and that's why you want to do it, is like, okay, why don't we actually just communicate? Yeah,
well, I think that what you're talking about with it being like objectification is very like poignant in the way that our culture views sex. And
for sure.
Yeah, it's not healthy, because even if you think about like in school they have sex ed, but what the fuck do they teach you in there, you know?
They teach you reproductive organs and how it works and how to put on a condom and things like that, from my understanding as a person who works in a public school.
Yeah.
But not in the health department.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because you think about like Mean Girls, where they're like, you know, don't have sex or you're going to die. You're going to get an STD and you're going to die, or something like that. Like that was sex ed.
The abstinence. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so, I think that like abstinence is definitely, you know, that's the solution for a lot of people, right?
Well, I don't know if it's yes. I think that for a lot of people, especially in the past, it has been very much taught. Yeah. Like now we live in a different world where it's they do a different kind of abstinence where it's like very scientific and it removes the like reality of the act from the talking about it. Like it's all very medical and terminologies, and it's very like sterile, for lack of a better word. And sure, there's talk of like, this is what STDs do, and like you can have a baby and all those things like that, but like they don't talk about the sacredness of it. They don't talk about its like potential, and not potential, but the actuality of like used in relationship as this powerful thing. And also, you know, they're talking to teenagers, and the schools / whatever institution's general principle is like, we don't want these kids to get pregnant at 16 because da 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 da. And so there's a very like, I mean, for lack of a better word, like I said before, sterile approach to sexual education in a public school.
Well, I think too, like even the sex ed that you get at home, right? Like it's not only up to schools to educate people, but like I don't know very many people who had like a proper sex talk. You know, I know I didn't. I got a book, but it was more about like what's going to happen to your body as your body changes. You know, like you're going to grow boobs and think about getting a bra and start your period and start smelling and like need to shower, and if you want to shave, you know, just like what's going to happen. And I figured, from my memory anyway, I figured the rest of it out. And like growing up too, you know, it's like there's a lot of interesting things around sex, and like it's so, I feel like we as adults, or like our parents or whoever, you know, the collective we is, but like we make it weird, we make it shameful. We're putting perverted meaning onto innocent things. Like I think about this scene in Yellowstone where oh my gosh, I'm forgetting their names now. I think it was like Casey. Anyway, they're the husband and wife. They're like, the wife's like, I think we need to have the sex talk with your son because he's like, I don't know, 13 or something at this point. And he's like, we don't need to have a sex talk. He grew up on a farm. Like, he knows what sex is. Like, it's normal and it's natural. And like, I think about that. Yeah, I think about that a lot. Like we make it fucking weird, you know? And I think, and I do also recognize that, like, as humans, we have a complex ability to make things weird.
Yes.
Right? Like,
I'm real good at it.
Well, I mean, I think about, like, okay, if you're like comparing nature, right? Like, sure, wild animals and the way that they have sex for procreation or for fun, or, you know, like the way that they, like, they're not married and they're not monogamous and they're not like, I mean, I don't know if they're raping each other. I've seen some questionable things at the duck pond, you know? I'm like, God, that girl's getting, that doesn't look like she wants that, you know? Like, I don't know what happens in nature and how they feel about it, but what I mean when I say that is, like, we have the ability to make things more complex, and we have the ability to hold more pain and therefore induce pain on others. Yeah. And so I can absolutely recognize that, but I do think that there's, like, this fine line that we get to walk between like noticing that reality and also where are we making it weird?
Yes. Yeah. And continuing to make it taboo and shameful so that it becomes this deeply embedded, mysterious, weird thing instead of like, oh, this is a thing that is a part of our world, just like breathing and walking and talking and all the things that are part of, like,
and
our
like
life.
make it feel safe to the point where kids feel like they can ask questions about it. Right. And I think about, like, you know, sex being a natural and normal experience, and I think about breastfeeding being a natural and normal experience, but, like, there are people who don't agree with that, and, like, it's just hilarious to me because it's like, oh, you know, like, oh, cover yourself up, or like, oh, you're showing your tit to my husband, and, like, I'm getting offended. Like, literally, I'm feeding my baby. Like, but it's like, this is what I mean when I say people get fucking weird about it. Like, we're getting weird. We're making things weird. It's a totally natural thing, but we're putting perverted meaning onto it. Right.
Well, and we also get to remember this too, that the other part of sexual education that's happening a lot, that sexual quote unquote education that's happening a lot, is that the way that the internet has unbelievable access to things is that porn is a very clear teacher of young children, like, nowadays, that we don't get we don't have that level of, like, let's talk about it as a sacred thing. Let's have this conversation as parents. And, like, we're just not talking about it. And we're getting, kids and young adults are getting that information from pornographic sites, which, like, not saying that, oh, you're never allowed to do that, and that's a shameful thing too. But what I am saying is, if that's the only source of sexual education you have, other than, hey, or put this thing on a cucumber, and also, this is what happens when the actual reproductive act occurs.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back into, like, the objectification and the way that sex sells, and the way that sex sells is completely, like, unrealistic. Like, it's all, I mean, a lot of the advertisements and stuff like that are photoshopped and airbrushed and perfected so that, again, you know, it's like there's this body shame thing that comes in because, especially for women, oh, I don't look like that model. It's like, well, first of all, that model doesn't look like that either, you know? But
which is, again, just puts more and more shame. It's like, how come I don't look like that? There must be something wrong with me.
Right. Yeah. And so I think we, like, get into that a little bit around in a bit. But I'm curious, for you, what does shame feel like?
Shame, for me, feels like my head is always hung low, right? Like, something's wrong with me, so I have to, like, put my head down and, like, you know, repent and apologize and, you know, prostrate myself before whatever holy being told me that I was bad and make myself better. And obviously that comes from some of my own upbringing. And even though that's not really what I was taught, like by words, that was the way that it played out. And I felt a tremendous amount of shame as a kid, especially around my dad, because nothing I could do was ever right or good. So I was always thinking, I'm not going to be good enough ever. And there was that thought and that feeling, and that was heavy of never feeling good enough. And so that's where shame shows up for me, is when I'm like, God, can I ever do anything fucking right? Like, I want to do lots of things right here, but I feel like I can't. And when I feel like I can't do anything right, that's when the shame starts to creep in. Like, you are not good enough.
Right. Well, so it's like, okay, the thought, right? The thought, it's like, oh, I can't do anything right. You're like, man, I feel guilty about that. And then it's like, you take that on so much to the point where you're like, oh, I'm just a terrible person. Like, I just can't ever do anything right.
Right. And that
like,
guilt
shameful.
That guilt is different for me. Guilt is like, wow, I really see how I screwed that up, or like how I made a mistake here, and I can be drawn back in to something good. Mm-hmm. And I like use that feeling of guilt to say like, I apologize, or I'm sorry for showing up in that way, as opposed to the shame, which really buries itself deep in the subconscious and deep in the body, and it's like, oh gosh, I just feel so awful all the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. That like shame, for me, I think about like being a young girl and like getting hit on by construction workers as like a prepubescent teen.
Oh my gosh.
Like
that's wild.
And just like feeling shameful about that, because it felt wrong and like inappropriate, and I didn't feel like I was safe to be myself. And so there's ways that like shame, I feel trapped by shame, and so it like encroaches and like puts a cage on my freedom. And
you do like your freedom.
I do like my freedom. And I think that within that trappedness and like the way that it I guess the way it shows up also for me and probably a lot of people is like it can influence the actions we choose to take.
Yeah.
And like there's identity wrapped up around into it. It's like, oh, well, I don't want to be a bad person. And I think about like Gabor Mate shares some things around authenticity versus connection, and how so often we will abandon our authenticity in favor of staying in connection because it's a survival mechanism. And so he has a really good like podcast where he talks about that. If I can find it easily enough, I'll put it in the show notes for y'all. But I just love Gabor Mate's teachings, and I could just listen to him.
He's amazing.
Please read me good bedtime stories. I could listen to him and go to sleep. Yeah, his voice is very soothing. Very peaceful, and but I think about like not people. Interesting words. Okay, so there's a way that shame plays into us not showing up authentically.
Yeah. Have you felt like you have specific influences or actions that happened when you feel trapped? Like when you feel trapped and in shame, like how does that show up in the world around you?
Well, for a tangible example, I don't like wearing a bra. And so my nipples like to be the star of the show. And who am I to stop them? Except there's like shame around that, because it's like, I don't know. There's so many like programming things around it. Like number one, Victoria's Secret, you want your boobs to look perfect and like perky, but don't show the nipples. And like, what do other people think about my nipples showing? Like, and are men gonna sexualize me because my nipples are showing? There's like all those freaking, I can't think of a specific movie, but I know there's like those frat boy movies, where like the nipples are showing on the girl with the big tatas, and like the nipples are always showing, always. Yeah. And so it's like this sexualization, and I'm like, can I just live my life unrestricted, buy a bra, please. And so I know that that's affected my posture. Or the choices, right? Like I'll wear a bra because a particular shirt is like, absolutely not supportive and hiding my nipples at all or something, like there's some shirts, like ladies, I know you know what I'm talking about if you're in the free the tatas movement, but like there's some fabrics that are just a lot more revealing, and not as forgiving, I suppose. And like, it's a practice, right? To like, be authentic and like dress how I want to dress, and like if my nipples are being the star of the show, then like don't look at them, like fuck, leave me alone.
They don't have to be. It doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to be this whole thing.
Exactly. It's only weird if you make it weird.
Yeah.
So speaking of shame and how it shows up for you, what about you?
Just in general, how shame shows up for me.
Well, you kind of shared about that, like growing up, but I guess like sexual shame.
You mean like when I cried the first time? Like just boo-hooed, like I'm the worst person in the world. I shouldn't have done
Can you tell us some context?
Oh my gosh. Like I was engaged and I had all these stories running through my head about how God wouldn't love me anymore.
Because you had sex before you were actually married.
Yeah.
That's why you were crying.
Yes. I mean, truly. That's why. I love it. I love that you're getting a kick out of this. Thank you. I'm going to start crying now too. I'm kidding. Because I'm not ashamed about it anymore in the sense of like.
Yeah, sure.
But like, oh my gosh, it took me 33 years to develop a sexual ethic that I was like, yeah, this one is something that I don't have any shame around anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, there's the thought of like, I wanted it a lot and I still want it a lot. And there's that thought of like, you can't even be perceived as a sexual being, especially as a pastor and as a teacher. Like, holy cow. It's like, if you even hint that you are sexual as a person or have a sexual side of you, that's like dangerous. Or
right.
Like, I'm not going to let people be around you. Like, I'm not going to talk to you about God because like, what God
You're a
is?
Sexual deviant.
I know, right? And like, so what?
Like,
if
how do you think you were born, bitch?
I know, right? Like,
where do you think you came from?
You just suppressed all that stuff anyway. So
yeah.
I just started to not suppress mine anymore. I mean,
yeah,
within the last couple of years here.
It's interesting that you talk about like being seen as a sexual being, and I can totally relate to that. Like. Yeah. Being the weirdo, and then there's like sort of this, or was this like running joke within my like friend group of women who like I was the only one who enjoyed sex and liked it, and like I'm like, what's going on with you guys?
Yeah.
Like I don't think I'm the weirdo, I think you're the weirdo. And like but at the same time, like feeling like, I guess showing up to those experiences like I think y'all are fucked up, like yeah, I don't think it's here. Me, and I'm pleased with myself and my sexuality. But then like there's also this like back end story that's happening sometimes around like, man, is something wrong with me that I want sex so much? Like, did something inappropriate happen to me, or like am I fucked up?
That's so interesting.
Instead of it being like, no, it's just fucking normal.
Right.
And like if women if women didn't have a high sex drive, like, don't get me started on this yet.
It's a new episode.
But, like, if women did, like, historically, think about this, and evolutionary, if women didn't have a sex drive or have a high sex drive, we would not exist as a species.
Absolutely accurate.
And so, I mean, there's just so much that goes into sex drive for women, and I went really deep in this a couple years ago and like was trying to figure out different things. I mean, I read all kinds of stuff. I've got a vendetta against birth control at this point in my life because I think that's fucking with so many hormones. Like that fucks with the hormone cycle of the woman.
Yeah.
And of course your sex drive is going to be fucked up if you're fucking with your sex hormones. Like, what do you think? I'm sorry.
Don't get me started. She gets started. No, it's okay.
Not, and I say that not from a place of like judgment towards anyone. So I hope that that's not offensive, or I am frustrated with this system,
right,
that makes that the automatic go-to when like women just get put on birth control.
Right.
As soon as you're 15 or 16, or as soon as you get your period or whatever it is, like birth control is the solution to so many problems that women have, that it should not be, quite frankly. Like, no, I'm not a doctor, but it should not be. Like, well, I've done enough research.
Yeah, and you are definitely someone who honors your cycle and honors your body and all that kind of stuff. And so there is that. What does the natural, like, not logical because that's not the right word, but like, what is the natural way that you approach like being able to take your body and give it the things that it needs when it comes to sex and sexuality? Like, how are you saying what I have here sexually is natural? My sex drive, my sex life, all those things, and being able to, for you, like, make it turn this culture's stupid ideas of it on its head.
I mean, there's a lot, like I said, that go into the sex drive of a woman. Hormones are incredibly important. And so supporting your cycle and learning more about that, getting off birth control, like, I know that's probably a little bit scary, and there are natural ways to like avoid getting pregnant that don't include condoms. And if that's a thing, which it is for a lot of people, like not just men, but it's like, just wrap it up, sure, okay, you can just wrap it up, or you can find other ways and like work together with your partner, so it's not only on the woman also to like
yes,
be aware of the cycle and be aware of how it happens, because there's like 2 or 3 days throughout the course of a woman's cycle, monthly cycle, where you can actually get pregnant. And I think people don't know that. And there's like herbs and there's all different kinds of things you can do to like prevent pregnancy that don't fuck with your hormones.
It'd be really fun to find out about. So
yeah. So there's that. And then also another thing that I think is really, misunderstood around sexuality and women's hormones and like libido for women is like hormones is a key thing, and then next is like intimacy and emotional safety. And also, like, I feel like a lot of women, especially if you're a mother, you spend a lot of time in a masculine role.
Yeah.
And like mothering, the way it's set up right now, is actually a really masculine job. That's my belief.
Wow.
Like, because you're figuring out what's to like the structure of the day. You're packing everything and making structure for them to go to school on time. And what you get to do to get yourself to work and to all the groceries or all the different errands and stuff that you're running, the timing, the structure, the framework of the day, and then doing the dishes or doing the all the chores around the house. Like, I don't know if that's masculine or feminine. I don't know how I feel about that. But
sure, that's fair.
It's like there's all these different jobs and physical labor and stuff. And then, like if you are working, and also we live in the patriarchy, like it's just really hard to get out of that heavy masculine energy as a woman if you're not aware of it. And so then there's like not this polarity in the bedroom. And of course you don't want it.
Yeah, of course you feel shame around it.
Right. And a really good book to read is Intimate Communion by David Data, and we can link that in the show notes if you're interested in that and learning more about like feminine energy and masculine energy and creating polarity and how that all works together.
It's pretty dope. And kind of going back to what we were talking about before, not that the rabbit trails aren't amazing because we love them to pieces, but how does that show up for you? We never really talked about how that shows up in your body or your life.
How that shows up in my life?
Yeah.
Well, I told you about my nipples.
Well, yeah,
But-
there's that. There was that, like, yeah. But
I think also...
Thanks for telling me. I appreciate it.
I think also, you know, and also about the frequency thing and thinking there's something wrong with me. And then, like,
Same.
being
Absolutely
shameful of kinks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's been really interesting. And I mean, the work that I do now is around freeing women from the shame of sexual shame.
Yes.
And like, I mean, for me, there was a lot of shame around being a woman in general.
Oh,
like,
can't imagine.
It'd be curious to do like a poll or something, but I remember being in a room of women and the facilitator was like, raise your hand if you've ever wanted to be a man or be a boy, whatever, you know, and like 2/3 or something, like 85% of the room raise their hand, including me. And so it's just, there's a lot of shame around being a woman, and there's like a lack of safety and a lot of different things. And so the work that I do with women and supporting them getting back into their bodies and out of their heads and embracing the feminine within, and the yoni casting workshops that I do where the yoni, which is also another Sanskrit word for holy space or holy temple, which is your pussy or your vagina and your vulva, like all of that. And so the yoni castings is where we take a mold of our yoni and I set it up in a very like ceremonial, sacred way, and it's a really beautiful experience. But the yoni is the most shamed part of any body. Mm-hmm. And I think of anything, because like if you think about, guys don't have shame around their dicks. They like whip it around everywhere. They pee in public. Like they literally could give two shits.
It's true. But
like there's so much shame around the yoni. Yeah. And it's like, why does it smell like that? Why does it look like that? What's with all the folds? Like, why can't I pee standing up? Like, there's just like so many things, and it's very misunderstood. It's very mysterious, and I think that makes it beautiful personally. But like, there was a time where I wasn't there.
Sure.
And yeah. So and
how's that show up in the world too?
Well, I mean, it shows up in the world where you have all these women having experiences that they're shamed about sharing. Ooh, like you think about the Me Too movement. Ooh. And all of those traumatic stories that were being kept secret out of shame, or, you know, just outright dismissed. And so whenever you think about like these different stories that are traumatic and violating, you hear a lot where people blame themselves. Oh, I shouldn't have done this. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. So there's a lot of guilt. And then if you take that even a step further, where it's like, man, I'm just gross. Ooh. And so then there's the shame, you know, and a lot of that comes from trauma. Like it literally, it's all from trauma. And I think that people like to compare trauma and like, oh, well, nothing actually happened, or, you know, I wasn't raped. Like if it's not this big T, capital T trauma, then it doesn't count. But there's so many little traumas that like death by 1,000 cuts is still a death. Yeah. And where, you know, you think about the culture and the messages that we get in these different thoughts and that are attacking your authenticity and attacking you as a person and making you not feel at home in your body, where you're just riddled with shame. Yeah. I believe that that's trauma also. I mean, trauma doesn't have to be that you were sexually assaulted in order to have that sort of trauma, where like trauma interferes with the body's capability to process emotions. Right. And when we are not able to process our emotions, then that energy, because emotions are energy in motion, that energy has to go somewhere. And so if we don't process it or shake it out or however you get it out, then it gets held and stuck in the body. Yeah. And that, I mean, that shows up like all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
You know, as women, we store emotions in our hips and our womb and our pussy. And that can manifest as like, there's a lot of women that I know that have like really painful sexual experiences, or like there's different, you know, I remember there was one time where I just like, I killed over and I curled up in like a fetal position because something hit something wrong during like a sexual experience. And it was terrible. And I know that that's like, I'm not alone in that story. And I know that there's a lot of people that like, just in general, sex is painful because they're so tense and so tight. And, you know, there's that, oh, you want a tight pussy. No, you don't want a tight pussy. You want a strong pussy. Because if you have a tight pussy, it's like, that's what, it's painful and you're tense, and that's not the same thing.
Might be a lot of armor there.
Exactly. And it's tense because the body keeps the score, and like all those emotions and all those things get stuck in the body. Like you think about having a tense neck. That's not a pleasurable experience.
Yeah. You know, like, ooh, your neck is so tight. Like,
right.
Hooray. Like, celebrating that. You're like, let me rub that out.
And, yeah, speaking of rub it out, like lack of orgasm, right? Yeah. Like, there's a lot of shame and trauma and like unprocessed emotions, and also disconnection from our emotions, and therefore a disconnection from our body entirely. And so when you're not fully connected, it's like orgasming can be really challenging. And like we are in our heads a lot. And then other ways that can manifest is like lacking confidence and having self-doubt, stress and anxiety and depression, and like being disconnected from your intuition.
Ooh, intuition's a good one.
Yeah. What's like ways that it shows up, like mentally, physically, emotionally.
Sure.
Spiritually. Like, this is all, you got to deal with your trauma, folks.
Yeah, it's important to talk about. And you were talking before about trauma. Trauma isn't necessarily like the action that happened, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah, that's what Gabor Mate talks about that also.
It's how you respond to that and how other people respond to you responding to that. Because if, you know, you have somebody who is an authority figure telling you can't do it like that, then you're going to store that in your body as trauma. So like, even with that, where does this trauma, this shame, so much of this come from? Like, who is purporting this freaking monstrosity of
the church?
Shame? Well, okay. I mean, okay, I can't disagree with you entirely, right? Because as somebody who's been involved in the church, as the youth pastor who literally gave the sex talks, I heard, oh my God, I heard someone, this was ridiculous. I heard someone in a youth group once, I was like leading the discussion, and I was telling people about like, these are the parameters around we're going to have this discussion. Okay, we're not going to shame people. It's not going to be about this because like, I'm so progressive. But this kid said, not this kid, sorry, he was a kid technically, but he was like an 18-year-old volunteer. And he was like, if you look at a woman any differently than you look at your grandma, you're sinning. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second here. Because, like, I don't like that at all, first of all. Because, like, I don't want to be thinking about my grandma. Yeah, exactly. Like, it just was very, like, very pointed. And, yes, that showed up in church. Yes, that comes from purity culture. And, like, oh, where's my promise ring? Yes, that happens, but it's been around for a long time. Yeah,
and I think it's interesting because I didn't grow up in the church world. I'm a heathen, and like, but you know, I think that religion is very prevalent in the culture and in the country, and especially in the South.
Variation of it is, yes,
right. But like, I feel like I have not experienced a religion that does not shame sex.
Agreed.
And so it's like I even picked that up sideways, you know, just like by osmosis or something.
Right. Oh, and it's embedded in politics and all that stuff like that we don't talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's like, okay, so it's not only religion, right? But it's also like family of origin stuff. Like, how did your family view sex, and was it actually talked about, or
Right.
was it like, I mean, I guess it gets tied back into religion if you grew up in a religious household where
Yeah.
it's like, no, that shit's wrong. Don't talk about it. Don't do it. You know, and I don't know. I think about like my you think about like walking in on your parents having sex.
I
Did you ever do
never
that?
think about that. Thank you, but I
No,
will.
okay, but I
Nope.
think about that topic. Have you ever
Yes.
done
No.
that?
Not once ever.
Interesting. I didn't walk in on them, but I like came upstairs and I heard them and I went right back downstairs.
Sure.
And I think too, like there was one time where my youngest son came in and I was being intimate and he's like, "What are y'all doing?" And the answer was like, "Oh, I'm just loving on her." And I'm like,
Okay, good
"Okay,
answer.
you know, that's a really sweet answer."
Good answer. Good answer. Serious.
Yeah, it's like I'm just loving on her, like go in the other room. And I'm like, "Okay, that's a really sweet answer." And like didn't make him wrong, didn't make him shameful or like, you know, get out of here, you pervert, you know,
yeah,
like
none of that.
but and also, you know, it wasn't
Or even like a lie, like, oh, just doing the, just I don't know, wrestling.
Yeah,
Oh
wrestling.
gosh.
And I think like that to me has always been really important to be honest and
Right.
truthful and like matter of fact and sharing just enough information for age appropriate stuff, you know, like and I remember like panicking, thinking like, gosh, what am I going to say the next morning? You know, like he's going to ask me, but he didn't even ask me.
No, yeah, of course not.
But it just was very like an interesting experience. And I think about that too. Like if your kid ever walks in on you having sex, like just, can we not make it weird?
Yeah, just say, love it on. There you go. Keep on
Loving
going.
on myself. Being loved on. I don't know, whatever.
Sure.
So,
Easy peasy.
where it came from. Are we feeling complete about that?
I feel complete if you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
So,
comes from a lot of different sources.
Yeah, it comes from a lot of different things. I mean, I'm sure you have stories of where it came from for you as a listener.
Oh, you bet.
And I'd love to hear about them.
Yes,
as
please.
always, tell me.
Tell me more.
So moving out of shame, and the way that I see it is moving out of shame and into freedom, because you cannot experience freedom without releasing the shame that binds you. That's a quote by Samantha Schaub. Thank you.
An OG.
Original OG quote that I made. I've been doing a lot of work and a lot of like storytelling and writing around shame and how that shows up for a lot of different people and how we can break out of that. And you know, I think a lot of experts and a lot of people in the self-development world or whatever, it's like, oh yeah, go to talk therapy and like, you know, talk out your family history and all those things. And I do think that that's a really great start. You have to understand things in your mind as well as in your body, because particularly with shame and a lot of these other different emotions like anger and rage and all those things, like emotions, they're stored in the body. Like I said before when we were talking about trauma, it's what happens, and there's so much scientific research and different like case studies and all these different things. And for me personally, like I've moved through a lot of different emotions with my body, like through movement, through dance, through breath work, through massage, through sauna and ice bath. Like there's so many different things that you can do to help support your body move and process and release the emotions that have been stored in like the cells and the tissue and the muscles of your body. And so yeah, shame lives in your body, and we get to move it out. And I shared a couple different things, but that I've done in the past and experience. And so you get to to utilize your body and its wisdom, because the body is so like, it fascinates the shit out of me. Like I just fucking love the body. I think it's phenomenal and masterful, and like I'm just in awe of it. And you get to utilize its wisdom, because it knows. It's so smart. It knows what to do to heal if we could only get our minds out of the way enough for it to do what it's designed to do, which is heal.
Yeah.
And, you know, that way you can, like, fully liberate yourself from the shames that bind you. And
Lord knows we need more fully liberated women in our world.
Yes, queen, and men too. But I would have if I were a Benton woman, I would say that shame runs a little deeper in the female
I think you're right.
race.
I think that men have a general quality of shamelessness. It's like, or if it is, it's truly stuff way down in there, buried so dang deep that nobody can get to it really. But
yeah, and I'm sure there's people who would argue the opposite, and I'd love to have that conversation, honestly.
Please.
But yeah, somatic and embodiment practices, you can, like, Google what that is. I feel like my page on Instagram is a really good resource.
I was also going to suggest that as a good resource for what a fully liberated woman looks like.
Yeah, dance and movement. Like, if you can look up an ecstatic dance place near you and go there, like, that can be one of the most liberating experiences if you allow yourself to go there shamelessly and just do and, like, work through the whatever emotions come up for you. Like, ecstatic dance is incredibly healing, and it's, like, it's fun.
Yeah.
You know, you can make it fun. It doesn't have to be this, like, hour-long talk therapy session where you're, like, mulling over things and, like, trying to figure it all out.
I love that.
Like, just let the body do the work, and you don't even have to understand it.
Yeah, man, hey, and nobody cares about your nipples there, so.
Oh my God. Yeah. So I think that's all we've got for y'all, and I'd love to hear, you know, what you got out of this episode, or if you have a difference of opinion or a way that shame and stuff has shown up for you. I love talking about all of this stuff, and I love hearing from you guys. So we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found parts of this podcast interesting, useful, or at the very least entertaining, I hope that you'll share your takeaways and tag me on social media, or leave a review. And we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.